the Trump train. We need 4 more on the Trump train. Headed your way, Trump train. God bless the USA. Get on board the Trump train. We need 4 more on the Trump train. Headed your way on the Trump train. God bless the USA. Yeah, it's headed your way.
We are making America strong again. We are making America safe again. And we are making America great again. Thank you.
All right. Over to you, Dan.
I'm right here, buddy, ready to go. And Mary Fanning and Alan Jones are going to be joining us, and we're going to be talking about the project Scorecard and how the hammer and the computer was used to try to steal the election from President Trump. And it's not news because it's happened in the past. It happened in 2012. It happened, I'm sure, in 2016 in some of the midterm elections. And, of course, it happened 2018. I mean, it happened, I'm sure, in 2016. They just didn't realize how much power Trump had as a candidate. And so they didn't cheat quite enough. But anyway, we've got a terrific program today. Is Mary and Alan on the call yet?
We have a call.
This is Alan.
Okay, good, Alan. I think Mary will be coming along shortly. I'd like to introduce you folks. Alan Jones is a investigative journalist who broke a series of national security stories at the Washington Times. Mary Fanning is also an investigative journalist who covers the Middle East and national security. And Mary is also the founder of the Coalition of Concerned Citizens. They do a report called the American Report. And because of their extensive high-level connections throughout the national security community, their information is considered some of the most credible in the country. And they really turned a story over that they've been reporting on now for a number of years, where whistleblower Dennis Montgomery, who was the guy that designed much of the software that was used in the hammer, and I'm sure that it was also used in the Scorecard software. So, Alan, welcome to the program. I want to thank you for joining us again today. I look forward to this. This is going to be a real eye-opener. I know that you've been working with General Thomas McInerney and trying to expose this stuff, and hopefully it'll get through to enough people that it'll start to have some real traction here. So anyway, Alan, thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting us back on the program today. This is a very important story. Now, we've been covering the hammer since the end of 2015. Just to remind your listeners, the hammer was a secret foreign surveillance system designed and built by a CIA contractor named Dennis Montgomery. Dennis was actually contracting with the U.S. Air Force as well as CIA and other agencies. Now, we reported in August of 2020 in a book that we recently published, came out in August 2020, called The Hammer is the Key to the Coup. That's the first time we mentioned Scorecard. So think of the hammer as a foreign surveillance, super surveillance system designed to keep America safe after 9/11. So it was designed to spy on terrorists and foreign adversaries such as Iran, Russia, and China. Now, in 2009, in February of 2009, shortly after Barack Obama was inaugurated and sworn in as president, James Clapper and John Brennan basically commandeered the hammer and turned it against the American people. So they weaponized a very powerful surveillance system that was designed to spy on foreign countries looking for bad guys overseas, and instead turned it on the American people. They started spying on Supreme Court justices, members of Congress, journalists, business people. And so that was going on. But we later reported about Scorecard. So the hammer is this giant computer system. Imagine a room full of racks of computer servers, and you kind of get the idea. But Scorecard is an application with a very specific function that runs on the hammer framework. And Scorecard was designed to actually monitor elections overseas with the capability of actually going in and changing voter tabulation, in other words, election results. And this was important when you have communist regimes interfering with elections, for example, in Eastern Europe or other parts of the world. But what's happened here, according to Mr. Montgomery, who, by the way, has received immunity agreements from the Department of Justice and the FBI in late 2015, and he actually turned over evidence to the U.S. government. He came forward and said there's illegal surveillance going on. But Scorecard has this capability of interfering in elections, and according to Mr. Montgomery, that's what's happened not only in 2020, but also in the 2020 primary, ensuring that Biden won over Bernie Sanders, and in earlier elections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that the midterm election, they indicated that they thought it would have some impact on that. And quite frankly, I think the 2016 election, they probably employed it, but they didn't employ it enough. And I think they were astounded that in spite of all the cheating, that Donald Trump was much more popular than their candidate. And obviously, I think that's the case today. I know that the lamestream media is reporting that there were 10,000 or tens of thousands of Trump people in Washington, D.C. I've seen the pictures. It looks like it has to be at least 500,000 and probably more than that were at that rally. And of course, same thing happens when Biden has a rally. There might be 6 people show up and they report it as 6,000. So it's obvious that our media is very, very complicit in this whole operation. And that's the tragic part about it, because we used to have an honest press, but no more. We have to rely on podcasts and programs like what we're doing today to get this information out, because the lamestream media just won't do anything with it. I know that's been a problem for you too, hasn't it, Alan?
Absolutely. The coverage has been heavily promoting the narrative that this was an open and shut case of Biden becoming the president-elect, who's now occupying the, quote, office of the president-elect, which actually doesn't actually exist. But yeah, you're absolutely right that the media from the election night forward has been trying to basically shove this result down the American people's throats without allowing the proper certification and opportunity for legal review, et cetera, to happen. And I also agree with you that they underestimated, I think, the turnout in favor of President Trump that happened in 2016. I imagine that actually Trump won by a landslide in 2016, even beyond the number of votes that he received. And they were overconfident that they had rigged the election and that Hillary was going to walk away with the presidency, and they were stunned. Mm-hmm. So they made sure that they were going to not make the same mistake twice. And I think that's what we're looking at right now, that there was a huge turnout for President Trump. And I think a lot of people just don't buy this when you look at the anemic turnout at any kind of Biden event. I mean, sometimes it seems like there was more press there and more Secret Service agents than there were actual Biden supporters showing up at these rallies.
Right. I remember seeing one where it was one of those so-called car rallies or auto rallies, and it looked like there were about 6 or 7 automobiles there. And I mean, at the same time, President Trump was getting 20, 30,000 people at his rallies. And I just, to me, it's so troubling because everything in the world is at stake here. I mean, we're talking about whether we're going to continue as a sovereign nation living under a free market capitalist system, or if we are going to be part of the new world order living under a world government where we're nothing more than just another country or another territory in that world government. And frankly, it's going to be under communism and Marxism. This is terrifying.
I think you're right that this election is being closely watched by people around the world. I'm sure it's being watched by pro-democracy activists around the world who, traditionally have looked to the United States as an example of how to run a fair election. But it's also probably being watched by dictators and other regimes around the world. And if we conclude this election with all these irregularities, that's just going to give an excuse for regimes around the world to then interfere in their own elections and say, well, hey, we're going to block election observers from our elections because that's what they did in Philadelphia.
Yeah, they did. And obviously, Alan, this is it's going to be so important that we fight this thing all the way through and turn up absolutely every possibility of corruption in this, because if they get away with this one, there's no turning back. I mean, they've gotten away with an awful lot, but to steal such an obvious theft of a very popular, and I'll use the term populist president that had the American people, the majority of the American people, strongly behind him. I think we're moving into a whole different ballgame here. This is going to be, well, who knows where we're going, but the thing is, I think it's going to have an impact on our internal disorder as well. I'm afraid we're headed to a civil war if this continues.
Well, of course, we all hope and pray that that doesn't happen, but it's very dangerous what we're seeing happen right now. And especially that the media seems to be acting like there's something wrong with asking questions about how an election was conducted. And I'm sure if you went on YouTube, you could probably pull up dozens of reports from ABC News and NBC News and CNN about foreign elections and talking very positively about election monitors traveling to this or that country to ensure a fair election. So apparently it's important for them to have fair elections, but when President Trump's involved in the election, all of a sudden it's some sort of crime to even ask a question about what happened, or even actually report the fact that election monitors in Philadelphia were not, and other places in Michigan, I believe, were not allowed to get close enough to actually effectively monitor where they could see what was going on. There were even reports that some guys had to bring in binoculars, which is just ridiculous. It's appalling.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I saw a program last night. Shiva Ayadura, who has been on our program, he's a PhD from MIT. Actually, the guy that created email, the concept of email, and he does a tremendous amount of work in different computer programs and things that from a I guess you'd call it a structural sense, to be able to analyze different computer programs and how they work. And they did over an hour program yesterday on the corruption that was so obvious with the computer programs, with what happened in Michigan and also what happened in Pennsylvania. And they were primarily focusing on Michigan because they went through and they analyzed all the various precincts in the Michigan area, and it was obvious that computer manipulation, that some kind of programming was taking votes on all the Trump, any of the Republican votes, that once they reached a certain point, that after that, everything started going downhill and going toward Joe Biden. And it was pretty obvious from what they did, the analysis that they did, that this was something that was programmed in. After a certain amount of votes came in for Trump, then start stealing a percentage of the votes, and steal more as more votes came in for Trump. And they had an actual linear chart that showed the progression as the amount of votes were coming in, how they were being taken from Trump and put into Biden's side of the equation. And it's pretty obvious they said that mathematically the chances of this happening were like 1 in how many ever trillion, that it could possibly happen that way every time with all these different precincts around Michigan. So obviously what Dennis Montgomery showed you guys is something that is a linear program that can steal votes. After a certain number, they increase at a certain percentage, and that follows almost a straight line. Talk a little bit about Dennis Montgomery and some of the things that he told you and Mary about.
Well, from our understanding, the scorecard has a prismatic algorithm, and that it's able to, or is programmed to, gradually change the vote discreetly so as not to attract attention to itself in increments of about 3% at a time, so that this can happen over time. And just watching the results come in, it appears that Trump had a strong performance in these swing states going into the evening, but at some point things started to change, and by morning you saw that the votes mostly had turned in favor of Vice President Biden. And so hopefully investigators are going to be able to take a look at this and find out exactly what happened. But there's more and more discussion on networks like Newsmax and on certain programs on Fox News. Maria Bartiromo's doing good coverage, and Lou Dobbs talking about some of these companies that are involved in electronic voting. And there's a lot of unease, and there has been for quite a few years, unease with electronic voting. Now, just to answer your question about Dennis Montgomery, he is...
Yeah, Alan, I'm on air right now. I'm trying to get Mary on the other line. We're trying to get her connected. She's having some trouble. So go ahead and continue if you would, please.
Sure. So Dennis Montgomery is a computer expert and software designer, and he was developing technology for the U.S. government. He worked with the drone programs, so the Predator drones and other programs. And he, like I said, designed and built a super surveillance system called the Hammer, beginning in 2003. And the idea was to keep America safe after 9/11 and to be able to intercept communications from terrorists and other adversaries. But he's been well regarded within the military, within the Air Force. There was an attempt to discredit him starting around 2009. And you're seeing some of these fact checkers now who are questioning the Hammer and Scorecard, turning to these articles that were basically planted in the press by the intelligence services and appeared in the New York Times and other places that said that Dennis Montgomery's technology was a hoax. And specifically, they were saying that Dennis had sold a technology to the CIA or provided it to them under contract that could intercept communications that were published as videos broadcast on the Al Jazeera network that had originated with Al Qaeda, and that embedded in these Al Qaeda videos were secret messages that were supposed to go out to Al Qaeda's terrorist cells around the world. Now, the claim was that this was a hoax technology, but we recently published an article around September 11th of this year, after a National Geographic special came out, in which an expert who had actually reviewed almost all the intelligence that was gathered in Abbottabad, Pakistan during the raid on bin Laden's compound, that they had actually recovered Al-Qaeda videotapes that were, or video discs, I guess it was digitally stored on computer, of pornographic films in which Al-Qaeda had embedded secret messages. This information came out during the National Geographic special, and that really proved that Montgomery was right all along, and that the criticisms of Dennis Montgomery published in the New York Times simply weren't true.
Well, you know, they always try to kill the messenger, and in this one, it's pretty obvious to those of us that are in the alternative media that the mainstream media is really fully in bed with this global Marxist concept. They seem to be, fully invested in the idea that the United States needs to be part of a one world Marxist socialist government. And that's why they attack people like you and Mary. That's why they attack people like Dennis Montgomery. That's also why it's so important that we keep President Trump in as president of the United States, because he's the first president in a very long time that's been 100% America first and 100% concerned about the future of our country under our Constitution.
Yes, it was refreshing, wasn't it?
Oh, wow. I'm telling you. Well, I'm going to, if you wouldn't mind, Alan, go ahead and talk a little bit about what the whole concept of stealing this election on the part of Joe Biden, how exactly that was put together, that plan was put together using the Hammer and using the programs that Dennis Montgomery really created for the CIA. Explain how President Obama and then Joe Biden, I'm sure, was involved as well, how they turned that program against the American people and turned it into a tool for their radical agenda.
Sure. So if your listeners go over to our website, theamericanreport.org, you'll find an article that we published on October 31st. So that was published before the election on Halloween. And the title of the article is Biden Using Scorecard and the Hammer to Steal Another U.S. Presidential Election, just like Obama and Biden did in 2012. So we go through where we first learned about the hammer. And that was when we first heard the whistleblower tapes. That's the name that we gave to a series of audio recordings that were released by U.S. District Judge G. Murray Snow's courtroom in November of 2015. And so we went through these recordings, and that's where we first heard the words, the hammer. They didn't talk about Scorecard, but we learned about the hammer back then, and that the hammer, according to Dennis Montgomery's former business partner, Tim Blixith, who can be heard on these tapes, he said that the hammer basically wiretapped Donald Trump a zillion times. So that tells you that they were very interested in Donald Trump well before he declared his candidacy for president. They, according to Mr. Montgomery, the CIA considered Dennis Montgomery a threat. And obviously they were alarmed when he won the election and came after him even more. But we explained that Scorecard is able to actually change the results of an election. And a lot of these software systems are not very secure, as we're starting to hear. So I can't get into the details of how it works, but that it is able to go in there and change results of these elections. Now, Dennis Montgomery has been basically muzzled from speaking out about the hammer publicly. Back under the Bush administration, Director of National Intelligence, remember that's the job that James Clapper had, but well before James Clapper was the DNI was named John Negroponte, and he invoked the state secrets privilege and the Government Protective Act against Dennis Montgomery in order to muzzle Montgomery and prevent him from revealing illegal acts that had been committed by the government. So he wasn't able to come out publicly, but he tried to alert the appropriate people in Washington, D.C. And like I said, eventually he did receive immunity, and he provided evidence about the hammer as well as a scorecard to the FBI. And we know that for several ways. One, we've reviewed a letter that was sent to Mr. Montgomery's attorney by the Justice Department discussing an immunity arrangement. And then there's testimony that was provided by FBI General Counsel James Baker to a joint congressional committee in October 2018. Now, the transcript of that testimony had not been available publicly until a member of Congress, Doug Collins from Georgia, released that. And we went through it, and that's where we saw James Baker of the FBI discussing that Dennis Montgomery's attorney had approached the FBI and said, my client has information about illegal surveillance conducted by the U.S. government against the American people, including other members of the government. So in other words, the government was spying on the American people, and even within the bureaucracy, specific members inside the government. And he said, this is James Baker speaking, that he had actually received that evidence. And that evidence was provided by Dennis Montgomery in August of 2015. He traveled to Miami, Florida, actually Miramar, Florida, and that's where the FBI's Miami field office is located, and turned over 47 computer hard drives of evidence. And that went into the custody of the FBI. He separately provided sworn testimony to the FBI. He was being videotaped when he provided that. That happened in December of 2015 at the FBI's Washington, D.C. field office.
Well, I have to tell you, Alan, it doesn't surprise me, but you might be amazed to hear that Mary's been trying to get on for the last half an hour, and the links don't work for her, and we're trying to get her on through the telephone. So, needless to say, it's happening probably right now as we're doing this program. I mean, there gets to be a point when you say, okay, it's obvious that this isn't just a technical glitch. This has been happening a lot to us. We've had some programs that we had 1 million views on, and as soon as we hit the big numbers, YouTube and Facebook and the social media would drop us like a hot rock and say on the site that it was inappropriate material. We've had those kind of problems pretty much since early summer. So it's going to be really, really important that we keep moving forward with all this stuff, because frankly, if we don't, I mean, we're already hearing rumors, and it's being actually stated in some circles that they need to put together an enemies list against conservatives, and that we need to be listed, and we need to be sent to re-education or something. I don't remember exactly what they call that. So obviously, we've got a problem in this country, and President Trump is, in spite of all the efforts that he's made to try to expose the deep state and open this thing up, he's barely put a dent in it, and it just keeps getting worse day by day.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Now, when we've posted these stories, since we started talking about Scorecard, almost every story that we've put out now has been flagged by Facebook as somehow disputed or inaccurate. So if you see it come up on your timeline, you actually have to click through the propaganda that Facebook is citing. And the reason that Facebook is saying that they're censoring this is because a, quote, independent fact checker has determined that this is not true. And obviously this was not a detailed fact check. This is just an effort to silence the media. Furthermore, like you mentioned, there are talks about that are very chilling about assembling lists of Trump supporters. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, she's been promoting this, and others. And, trying to say that if you supported Trump or were serving in the bureaucracy for the Trump administration, maybe you're not going to be able to get a job now. And that's really scary when you have Americans saying that about other Americans.
Yeah, we couldn't have believed this, Alan. If you'd have said this was going to be the America of 2020, let's just say 10 years ago, I think you would have scoffed at it. I would have. I'd have thought, well, there's no way that we can slide that far downhill that fast. But in fact, we've been so much more taken over by the deep state than we had any idea that it's much worse than we could have ever dreamed.
I think that George Orwell's 1984 is proving to have been incredibly accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. I know that you're in the process right now of trying to expose, what has been happening and how we can do something about this. Obviously, Scorecard is, looks like maybe Mary's on. Yeah, good. Mary made it on. Mary, I want to welcome you to the program. I'm sorry that you've had so many problems getting on, but in fact, I even had trouble getting onto the program early myself. If I hadn't started about 20 minutes before the show started, I probably couldn't have gotten on.
There's a whole lot of that going on lately, Dan. I wonder why.
Yeah. Well, it's
Might have
pretty
something to do
obvious.
with Scorecard and Hammer.
Yes, it may have. And why don't you, Alan's been doing a terrific job of filling us in on Scorecard and the Hammer, but I know you've got your own thoughts on that too. And I'd like you to maybe tell our listeners a little bit more about your interaction with Dennis Montgomery and how all this is working with programs that you and General McInerney and Admiral Lyons and Allen were working on years ago.
Well, we broke the story on March. Actually, we broke it on March 4th initially, and the reason that happened was we had known about this. We had transcribed what are known as, we dubbed them, the whistleblower tapes. They came out of Judge G. Murray Snow's courtroom, and immediately there was some concern over those who were involved with the whistleblower tapes, not Montgomery, because we hadn't been in touch with them for, at that point at all. And we wrote a piece on the whistleblower tapes because President Trump had come out and said he was being spied upon, wiretapped. And in fact, we knew that he was. So we initially tweeted him, and then we published a piece. And immediately our website was completely destroyed. The hosting company tracked where the destruction came from, and interestingly, it came out of the Ukraine. So we got back from DC, and we put the website back up. It took some time from the 4th until the 17th. But what you should also understand is, after we published the story on the 4th, 30 hours later, WikiLeaks dropped CIA Vault 7, and they confirmed the existence of the Hammer.
Wow.
That's important.
Mm-hmm.
So we got the website back up, and Admiral Ace Lyons, and he had the largest command. It's a 4-star admiral. He brought the story forward with General Thomas McInerney. They went on air. They read our piece verbatim. And not until a year later were we able to put together the timeline with the release of the IG reports, where we saw Strzok and Page that very night, within minutes, began texting one another. And by 11 o'clock that night, they were talking about none other than Dennis Montgomery and his attorney. So what is the likelihood on the very night that an admiral and a general brought this to the airwaves on terrestrial radio, Operation Freedom? What is the likelihood that Strzok and Page were also talking about Dennis Montgomery? So we knew that they had weighed in on this, and there was some concern about it. Otherwise, they wouldn't say nothing about Montgomery and his attorney at that point. So as we looked at the timelines and we put them together, the very next day, after General McInerney had come on the airwaves and read this report verbatim, as well as a lively conversation about it, as he said, this was worse than Watergate, far worse than Watergate, and that the attacks on Donald Trump, President Trump, were nothing but tactical deception to cover up what they were doing with Hammer. Because after all, they were putting in place a technocracy that, a system that Stalin could have only dreamed of. And so, and because that's what the hammer is. But the very next day after General McInerney went on air, the investigation was launched before Congress into Donald Trump, the hoax Russia collusion investigation by FBI Director Comey. FBI Director Comey in December of 2015 had awarded immunity agreements to Dennis Montgomery as he handed over the 47 hard drives and testified to them. Now, you must keep in mind that at the same time Montgomery handed over this evidence and he testified, the 47 hard drives that he handed over were verified before the testimony, that the director of the FBI had this information and he had verified the information and he had been a part of the immunity agreement. And had Dennis Montgomery lied, Dennis Montgomery would be in prison.
Right.
Not just for lying to the FBI, but also you have to understand that the Director of National Intelligence had invoked, and this isn't, an award of any sort, he had invoked the state secrets privilege and a government protective order, which are basically a government muzzle to keep someone from talking about government secrets. Otherwise, they go to prison for life.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So at the same time, one of the people that was, intimately involved with this, was showing up in courtrooms with Montgomery, et cetera, was Carlotta Wells. Now, Carlotta Wells from the DOJ told Dennis Montgomery that if, in fact, the state secrets privilege and the government protective order were invoked against Montgomery in order to hide government malfeasance or government crimes, well then, in fact, they were null and void.
Okay.
So that next day, when James Comey goes before Congress and he launches a Russia collusion investigation against Donald Trump, he puts in charge of that Peter Strzok, who was texting the night before about Dennis Montgomery as General McInerney came on the air and exposed the hammer.
Mary, you couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, it is so incredibly complex and there's so much to this. You couldn't make this story up. I mean, and yet at the same time, I have to tell you, it amazes me that so few people are on Trump's side. Certainly in the mainstream media, there's no one. And look at how hard he's worked to try to bring this country back from the mess that it was during the Obama years. The economy, jobs, try to bring our military, our perception around the world, give us credibility. How in the world have they gotten away with this stuff, Mary? I don't get it.
Well, in large part, think about the hammer for starters. It was put into place in 2003 to keep America safe after the attacks of 9/11. That's important to understand. Montgomery built this tool as a foreign surveillance tool to protect the country, to protect our men in the battlefield. And I'm sure Alan explained that on February 3rd, 2009, Brennan and Clapper illegally commandeered the hammer and moved it to Fort Washington, Maryland, where instead of using it for foreign surveillance, they turned it on America. So when you look at what Barack Obama did, it wasn't just the rules of engagement that they gave our military. You're not allowed to shoot, unless you're shot at first. Or, the rules of engagement that our intelligence agencies were being held to. So they were no longer able to use the rule of law. In fact, if you remember, Phil Haney came out and told that they were saying that it was politically incorrect to be following jihadis in the country. So they were changing our intelligence agencies' rules of engagement as well.
Yeah.
That's really important to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden,
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, foreign jihadis that come and attack America have the rights of the U.S. Constitution. That's ludicrous.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the fact that the open border policies that allowed so many terrorists to come in from Central America, and they were actually recruiting and training terrorists down in Venezuela and different places in Central America, and they became part of that train of people that came up to the United States that Trump was trying to stop.
Absolutely. You know, Dan, if you don't have borders, you don't have a country.
Mm-mm.
It is really that simple. If you do not have borders or you don't have the rights of the citizens, then you don't have a country. And that's exactly what Barack Obama was doing. He was redistributing America to everyone but the American citizens, and he was destroying the U.S. Constitution and the rule of law. And it's not an accident that John Brennan has longtime communist beliefs. His family are communists, you know that. His father and grandfather before him were both part of the IRA. The IRA was, in fact, trained, financed, and armed by the Russians, the Soviets. You know, not many people understand that the IRA was a Soviet-trained and funded organization.
Right, and the Brennan was also a Muslim, on top of everything else.
Yeah, it's not just that he converted to Islam; it's that he converted to Islam while a station chief in Saudi Arabia. That means that he was turned. That's a little different than embracing a set of religious beliefs. But beyond that, we all understand that Islam is the sword of communism. And it's being weaponized against America for the purpose of the destruction of this country. And the Islamic bloc was put together, these Islamic countries, not all are Islamic, but this was created in order to destroy America, death by 1,000 cuts. So that was to pare down and destroy our military, to keep us in never-ending wars, to make us go into extraordinary death. And you had no one better than implementing the destruction of America than Barack Obama, because, after all, you saw his new book. He's once again distracting everyone. This is all about racism and melanin, and, you know, Sarah Palin's a racist, and that was the big destructive factor because people were afraid of a black man in the White House. No one gave a hoot about whether he was green, pink, black, or whatever. It was his long red thread and his affection for communism,
right,
that was so concerning. It was his associations with Frank Marshall Davis.
Exactly. And the fact that his grandfather was, even though he was a CIA, he was well known as a Marxist.
Yes, he was. Stanley Dunham was a Marxist, and he was, you know, he wasn't just a Marxist. He didn't just have this belief system. He made sure that when he moved into the state of Washington, he was and brought his daughter to the Little Red Schoolhouse, which was a well-known Marxist institution. He was in touch with people who came into the country for the destruction of the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
And his grandmother was the same. It wasn't just his grandfather. It was Madeline as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got a real problem here. We've got a stolen election. I want you and Alan to talk about how this whole scorecard system and the hammer has been turned against the president, and how now I heard something early on. Donald Trump said that they had watermarked the ballots so that they couldn't be they could be manipulated, but they'd be traceable. Do you know anything about that? And is in fact there a way that we can find some truth out of this whole thing?
Well, at this point, there's no confirmation on that. And we do know that Rush Limbaugh came and said that that was not true. And anytime you're over the target, they always enter new information into the scene as a distraction, such as a watermark. So keep that in mind until we know, at this point, it's an unknown. We don't know what the facts are at this point.
Okay.
We do know, however, about Scorecard.
Okay. Well, tell our listeners your perception of how Scorecard was used to rig this election.
Well, we've written several pieces on it. Scorecard was a prismatic scoring algorithm which steals the vote at the transfer point. And that's important because as a vote is put into the Secretary of State's office and transferred to the vault that collects the votes, that's the first time that it must enter the internet. So when it enters the internet, that's the point at which the vote is stolen. All right? So at the transfer points, the vote is being stolen. So you can have all the handwritten ballots you want, but when the counts are entered at the Secretary of State's office, that's when they're stolen.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Can they go in and do a reconstruction, a hand count, and feel like there's any legitimacy to that? Because my understanding is that they were bringing in literally boxes and boxes and boxes of votes that were kind of discovered after the fact, and that they were virtually every single one were for Biden, and they didn't even vote for other candidates. It was just marked for him, and many of them had signatures that looked like they were from the same person.
Well, it's a couple of things. So one of the things that we noticed, and Sidney Powell mentioned this, is that there were blocks, cloned blocks of votes. And so at that point, what they had done was they could not keep up with the landslide of Trump's. So they started replicating these blocks of votes across 10 states. That's a major piece of evidence when you're replicating massive blocks of votes. So in Wisconsin, we know that all of a sudden at 4 a.m., there was 112,000 votes entered into the system, and 112,000 of those votes, all of them, were for Joe Biden. That's a statistical impossibility. The same thing happened in Michigan, where 139,000 votes were entered into the system at 4 a.m., and 105,000 of those 139,000 were all for Joe Biden. The falsified ballots were covered for the stolen votes via Scorecard. So you had to have all these falsified ballots being delivered to cover for all the votes that were being stolen via Scorecard.
Okay. Is there a way that we can expose all this in a way that people can easily see?
Well, you've heard Sydney, if I'm sure you did, on Maria Bartiromo this morning, and she said that they have the evidence, they have witnesses, they have testimony that proves everything that I've just said.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we need to make sure that this is an honest election. And even though I hate to say this, even though I don't have a whole lot of faith in the average American that watches the mainstream media because they're being sold a line that's just completely wrong with anything that our founders believed in. But in any case, even let's just say in some strange circumstance that Joe Biden did win because he got honestly that many more votes and carried that many more states. I would go along with that if it were true, because we have to have integrity in our election process. But I don't doubt for 1 second that it just flat isn't true because of Scorecard.
Let me ask you a question and tell me, do you think that based upon Hammer and Scorecard, that might explain to you why Hillary Clinton did not feel the need to campaign and why Joe Biden thought that he didn't need to campaign, or while the Democrats thought they could put a man who obviously has dementia and is drooling up as a candidate for the U.S. president? Have you ever seen anyone less able to lead a country?
Not really. And on top of that, he couldn't even remember who he was running against. He kept referring to Donald Trump as George.
And he came out and said he had the greatest voter fraud system that anyone has ever seen in place.
Yeah.
I mean, he can't even not tell the sins that they're looking to commit in advance.
Well, and
he also said he was running for U.S. Senate.
Yeah, running for Senate. And on top of that, they've got the recording of him in front of the CFR bragging about getting the prosecutor fired in Ukraine because he was investigating the company that his son had been given this wonderful, miraculous job with, and bragging about how he got him fired. And yet the mainstream media wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, even though it was in his own words. It was a recording of him.
Dan,
that's astounding.
Think about this. It's astounding, but it's also that he's been exposed as taking in one deal. We know about the first $1.5 billion from China.
Mm-hmm.
Then we know about another $1 billion that he had the prosecutor fired, that he had the temerity to brag about on live while he's being taped. So we know that here's a man that's selling out America. He's stuffing both pockets as fast as he can. He's putting his drug-addled son on board as a bagman to collect these payoffs. I mean, this is not in question. This is a play of treason right before our faces. And so they dare the American people to wake up and see that which is right before them.
Right, and the fact that they've almost accomplished that. I mean, it's amazing to me that the American people, with all this evidence out there, that the American people aren't saying, "Wait a minute, we're not going to put up with this crap."
No, Dan, think about it. Joe Biden could attract maybe 12 people. He could have 8 cars in a parking lot honking. Then when he shows up on the campaign trail with the great Barack Obama, the politician of all time, even then he only had 12 people.
Mm-hmm.
The American people didn't turn out in a landslide, the greatest vote ever taken place, because they're asleep at the wheel. They understand exactly what's going on, and they're sitting back and they're holding their fire until it's time. And if these little rats, these Antifa, and these other people who have been turned up with the cries of racism, most Americans understand that they could give a hooey about how much, melanin is in one's skin. They don't judge their fellow Americans by, where they came to be part of the American experience and the American family. These are, I dare say, most families have all different kinds of people and ethnicities and even religions in their family. This is a Soviet tactic of dividing and turning the American people against one another, and they're not buying it. You know why? Because they were disturbed with the things that Barack Obama was doing while he was in office. You have to understand, in 2012, according to the whistleblower tapes, Barack Obama stole that election as well with Joe Biden. They were using the hammer and scorecard in 2012 when they stole the vote in Florida. The whistleblower tapes lays that out. Keep in mind, those recordings, which were never to become public, that somebody released, but it's not who they said released them because someone tried to cover it and saying the ACLU attorney released them. ACLU attorney did not release them because Montgomery spoke to her and she says she did not. And he has, the ability to see whether things are truthful or not. And so we now know that Barack Obama wasn't even elected in 2012. And so while he never, he might have been smooth and he was a whole lot of things that Americans didn't like, and that was that he wasn't particularly pro-America.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell people I'm not a racial bigot. I'm a social bigot, and I just don't like low life commie scum. So the fact is that I don't care what color your skin is. I just don't like low life commie scum. Now that makes me a social bigot, I guess, or political bigot. I guess maybe that's better, huh?
Well, I think it makes you an advocate for freedom. And when you understand that when you put communism into power every time, you look at what Mao did, the amount of the 100 million people of his own that he killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Or Stalin.
Communism has killed more people, but then keep in mind that UN Agenda 21, they got to get rid of 93% of the world's population. And so, getting rid of people is not a problem with them. The problem is not getting rid of people.
Again, you're exactly right. We're talking about Agenda 2030. We're talking about globalism. And remember, when we're talking about globalism, what we're talking about? We're talking about global communism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It referred to it as Marxist technocratic feudalism. I mean, it's just kind of the worst of all worlds, and they're trying to get the United States into that system. Americans better wake up and realize we're in a fight for our lives right now, and we cannot let this election be stolen in the way they're trying to do it.
Listen, you have the Democrat Party, which is now the Communist Party, and they all have long histories in communism, particularly Joe Biden. He was put in power by the Council for a Livable World. That's a communist organization that came directly from the Soviet Silvermaster spy ring. You have Kamala Harris, who it's breathtaking. She actually said the same thing that Ocasio-Cortez says about putting down, killing people that don't agree with them.
Yeah.
When have you ever heard that kind of language from any American about killing the people in the other party? That is a communist revolution right before your face that's playing out.
Absolutely. And the part about Kamala Harris that's even more disturbing is the fact that her family had 200 slaves. Now, how do you claim to be so dead set against, and such a supporter of Black Lives Matter when your family were the ones that were slaveholders? My family was never a slaveholder, never.
No, nor was mine. In fact, the Irish, they were sold into slavery in vast numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my family on my mother's side were Quakers, and quite honestly, they were in southern Ohio. They were part of the Underground Railroad from some family history that I've
Right.
been able to determine. So, how in the world can they claim that race is a motivator when in fact even an awful lot of Black people in this country are starting to realize we're losing our country to Marxism, and that's all there is to it.
And both of her parents is immigrants. Her mother was part of the upper echelons of India. They were the high-level Brahmins who didn't accord rights to other people. So she comes from, on her father's side, he was not just an economist. He was an economist who taught Marxism.
Mm-hmm.
Her mother comes from the high-level Brahmins of India. That doesn't bode particularly well.
Boy, that's for sure. And then on her father's side, they do have a family history of being plantation owners and having 200 slaves, is my understanding.
Yeah, it's incredibly rich that they come and accuse Americans and, get over your whiteness and some of the more bizarre things that they've said, when in fact, these are the very people who supported slavery. These are the very people who supported, not having equal rights, not equal rights for everyone. That's
I wanted to bring up actually a little, if I can interject here, I was going to bring up a little history of the Democrats that conveniently has been swept under the rug.
Please do.
If you go online, search online for the Wilmington Insurrection of 1898, also known as the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. Now, this happened in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. At the time, Wilmington was the largest city in North Carolina, and it had a very large Black population. So a lot of the members of the local city government were Black. And there was actually an uprising and a coup that was led by the Democrats, in which they chased the Black officials out of town and killed a lot of them. And this was after the Civil War. And this was a mob of 2,000 white men who overthrew the legitimately elected government that consisted mostly of African Americans.
Yeah, that's amazing.
They killed at least 60. The estimates are that they killed between 60 and 300. These were the Democrats.
Well, and Alan, the Democratic Party was the party for segregation. They weren't the party that was trying to end segregation. That was the Republican Party. How did that come to be? I mean, LBJ is the one that was credited for creating civil rights legislation, and even the racist remarks that he made when he did that was about them voting for Democrats from here to eternity, basically, because we're going to pass this legislation along. And of course, everybody knows that it destroyed the Black family.
Absolutely. But through the educational system, they've basically managed to flip history on its head. And what's true is false. I mean, they made everything backwards. And so we have to reteach the American people the actual history.
Well, it's more than that. It's not just the history that they're teaching our children with Common Core and how they've perverted our history. our great American history. It's as Alan says, upside down, inside out. Those words have taken on new meaning as we've watched Antifa and Black Lives Matter and the Democrats and the Mockingbird media that are so terribly complicit in destroying this country and destroying the Trump presidency. Now you watch as they burn cities and they beat the hell out of people, punching old women in the face, not just punching, taking a board and slapping this petite little Chinese woman across the face in front of her husband. You know, they have no qualms about killing people. And that's how you understand the Democrats say, oh, this is a peaceful protest. Don't believe your lying eyes. Now you fully understand what upside down and inside out is.
Yeah, exactly. Top down and bottom up, and destroy everything in between. And that's exactly how Cloward and Piven works. That's exactly how that works.
Yeah, this is Bill Ayer's book, and this is what he described. And Larry Gratwald, thank goodness for Larry Gratwald, that he had infiltrated Bill Ayers and the Weathermen. And not only did he see how they were living with one another, but when they wrote the book Prairie Fires, and they told how they would turn society upside down via chaos and other things, they were going to destroy the family. They were going to destroy religion. They were going to destroy marriages. When you joined the Weathermen, and if you came in with your wife and your children, you had to subject them to having sex with everyone in the whole group. You know, these were very unusual people. Until you start understanding, honestly, it was until I did not start, I've told the story of, going back and forth and arguing, are we looking at fascism? Are we looking at communism? What, in fact, are we looking at here? And it was sort of my Chinatown moment when I finally ran into the work of Alexander Dugin, the mad professor out of Russia. And he was the professor to both Medvedev and to Putin. And he told about moving forward with the new Eurasian world order and their embrace of globalism and Gaia, the movement of Gaia. And most people think of, this global warming as a god. Well, global warming as a god is the worship of Earth, or Luciferianism. And that's communism. It is satanic.
Yeah, no, you're right, Mary. And all the things that you're talking about here are things that we've had in play in this country for a long time. And I think people, to me, it's that people just can't imagine the enormity of this. And so there's a lot of cognitive dissonance out there. There's a lot of people out there that would choose to ignore it.
Dan, we've talked so many times about Golitsyn and Pachepa and Bezmenov and Christopher Story. And, imagine something. We have watched this, and it's, the chaos and the destructive things that are happening in our society. But until we had those who had come to our country, who had come over as generals or KGB agents, and they said, this is what they're doing to your country. They're taking it apart, and they're using propaganda. They're brainwashing your children. They're brainwashing your entire country with propaganda via the Mockingbird media, the media that lies daily. And people, boy, they're so obvious now that people are understanding. But isn't it interesting that it was people who had lived under that boot on their throat who, when they escaped to this country, they said, this is what this is going on. And there's no one better at propaganda than the Russians. That is a weapon that they use better than anyone. And Bezmenov knew that because he was in charge of that when he was at the KGB.
No, that's right, Mary. Excuse me. And people need to realize that this population control thing, this getting rid of a lot of people, is part of that program.
the whole idea of abortion, and it took, I think, until the likes of Andrew Cuomo, the communist son of a very communist father, Mario Cuomo. It took until he started talking about, abortion as a right, but also that you could kill children up to 4 years old legally. Do Americans look at that and are not just horrified to hear a man say a thing like that?
Well, they should
Oh,
be.
take your 4-year-old out and say, "Oh, I've had enough of this, so we'll just kill her, and maybe cook her for dinner." What? I mean, this is so insane as not to be believable.
Well, it's the same family that put all these people that had COVID in nursing homes, and who knows how many people were killed by doing that. I mean, that, the numbers that I've seen are somewhere around 10,000, and yet he got away with it. He got away with it because people in New York don't seem to understand what's going on.
Well, the media is lying to them, and Andrew Cuomo lies constantly. I mean, when the cameras caught he and his brother laughing about that, can you even imagine? But beyond that, Dan, no one in their right mind doesn't understand the idea that, the population that's most at risk, now taking people who are infected, like the governor of Michigan, and putting them in the nursing homes with this advanced age population who's most likely to catch and die from this. That's not an accident.
Mm-hmm. No,
that was
not.
With purpose. That pretty much goes along with Barack Obama's Obamacare. When someone stood up and said, "Listen, my mother's in great shape, and if she needs surgery," he goes, "Oh, no, just tell her to take a pill." Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't see anything positive coming out of Obamacare, and it looks like Joe Biden has already pledged to expand it to a single-payer system.
Joe Biden wasn't elected, and Donald Trump won in a landslide. So for any Democrats that are out there listening, Donald Trump won in a landslide. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden had no followers. Many people had awakened. Donald Trump brought back an economy. He had unemployment down to 4% and under. He made sure that the Black community was no longer being oppressed by LBJ's Great Society, mm-hmm. where you're breaking up the family and you're not respecting Black people and instead buying them for a few cents. And he said, "No, you're every bit Americans." And so the Democrat Party has done everything they could to keep down the Black family and to break it up and to put them on entitlements and to destroy their work ethic and to make sure that they were filtering drugs into their communities. The American people were just so darn sick of the filthy, dirty, racist Democrats. And I would say that Donald Trump was too. He recognizes mm-hmm. people as his fellow Americans, period.
Right. Well, and according to the reports that I've seen, his percentage of the Spanish vote, the Hispanic vote, is really growing beyond any expectations. I mean, it looks to me like he did win in a landslide because an awful lot of minority people were the ones that were voting for him.
Well, they counted on certain groups of people being stupid. And once you come and you join the American family and you understand what capitalism and freedom and education and inclusiveness looks like, and many people came from different countries where they were not able to live but under the boot of the rotten communists who took over their countries, and as they all ran for freedom, they understood that Donald Trump was, they understood that he was the last chance. They understood that if the lights go out here, then they go out everywhere, and they're willing to fight for it. And the American people, be they Black or red or brown or yellow or white or any color, are willing to stand shoulder to shoulder to make sure that doesn't happen. So regardless of the Mockingbird media, regardless of the name Mockingbird Media was put into place by Cord Meyer CIA agent. And that was so that the and it's so noticeable now. That was so that you would have the media come on with the same talking points and just beat it into people's heads. And they think if you hear something often enough that you're not discerning enough to say, this is ludicrous. It's so, well, it's not just desserts, but it's kind of fun to watch Fox News collapse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they
really,
are. They are.
Oh my gosh. Rupert, people didn't necessarily understand that Rupert was working with George Soros, and that Rupert came in with the New America Foundation with Soros, okay? Do you understand the New America Foundation?
I do, yeah.
So for your listeners, it's a very interesting foundation, and Anne Marie Slaughter works with the Hillary Clinton, same mess, and where they got caught on a phone call. And so the agencies all had someone on the call, but they invited the wrong person of the same name. And she heard them tell that they were going to bring in as many people into this country, and they were going to have the infiltration of the country. They were going to have the virus overtake the host. They were going to push the American citizen into the shadows.
Mm-hmm.
Push the American citizen into the shadows. Barack Obama was giving, education loans or scholarships mainly, but also he was giving housing loans, and he was giving car loans to anyone who came into the country. So what they were doing was making sure that the American citizen was being deprived of jobs as much as they possibly could, really destroying, just like they did with COVID, the middle class. Because in a communist society, you have the low class and you have the upper class. And so it's the health of the country depends upon the middle class, the people who work, who have families, and who are entrepreneurs. And so COVID, you understand, as you're watching these big box companies, particularly Amazon, it's grown by twice. Mm-hmm. But it's putting out of business the small business owner who's put his life on the line building something, and then they close it all down. And they're continuing, and as Joe Biden says, he's going to close it all down again because he wants to make sure he crushes the middle class. And so people need to understand that he's crushing the middle class, and he's making sure you nor your children have opportunity. So the American people understand that they will stand up, but they're not barbarians who will get out and smack old ladies in the face. That's not who we are as a people.
Mm-hmm.
But they will stand up at the proper time.
Well,
they will stand up at the proper time.
Mary, we need those people to stand up now, and I think we saw evidence of that yesterday in Washington, D.C. The lamestream media said that there were 10,000 people showed up in Washington, D.C. for a Trump rally there. I saw pictures of it. It had to be 500,000, if not
at
more.
Least.
Yeah, if
at
not
least.
more. And yet, these are the same people that say that Joe Biden had thousands of people show up at his rallies, and then the cameras would pan, and there'd be 6 cars there.
He can't even keep up with the questions that he's supposed to read off of a piece of paper, nor can the media keep up with the question that they're handed to read him. Mm-hmm. Imagine how many hours that they had to practice just to get one question out.
Yeah, probably. And well, I can tell you, it's been a stacked deck. How do we make a difference? How do we, as a country, how do we as individual citizens, that's a perfect thing to be talking about. How can we make the difference to get our country back?
Make yourselves heard. Stand up. Call your congressmen, your senators, and tell them you will not tolerate this. Remind them that they work for us. And if they're going to find out, how much they work for us when they're removed from their positions for the act of treason, just for the act of treason going along with this. And understand that as much as they put on this kabuki dance on Fox News, and, you know, we're always really long on to CNN and MSNBC. I mean, honest people, anyone who's watching it, award yourself for being just stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I agree with you that standing up is a way that we're going to have to do it. But I look at Montana. Montana had a Republican sweep. I mean, we filled every state office with a Republican. We increased the legislative seats by a significant amount. It was already a very red state, but it became an extremely red state as a result of the election. We elected a senator and a congressman that are both Republican. We have one senator who is, frankly, he's probably one of the real commie problems that we've got, and that's happened through voter fraud. That's happened well through the reservation, and that's a whole nother story. But we've done radio programs, and I have in my archives, in my folders, copies of checks for $40 that were written on the Montana Democratic Party that were given to Native Americans to vote for the Democratic candidate, and yet they got away with it. Nobody is willing to take that to court. Anyway, long story short, we added an awful lot of Republican seats in the state of Montana, but yet Trump only got 56% of the of the presidential vote. In other words, Biden got 44. I know that wasn't the case. I am absolutely certain that wasn't the case. But yet, when we talk to our legislators, we talk to our congressmen and say, you need to keep this this lawsuit and all this alive to protect President Trump. They're very, very wishy-washy about it. All I can say is that our president has worked so hard to save this country. That's the very least we can do for him.
Well, this is the fourth coup. Let me just finish. This is the fourth coup that we were watching that has been 4 coups against this president, whether they tried to impeach him or lie about him with Russia collusion. Understand something else. When we exposed the hammer, and we wrote a piece, Dan, I don't know if Alan went over this, but since 2015, the FBI hid the evidence to prove that Hunter and Joe Biden were working with China, throwing America off a cliff. And what we found out was that the Obama White House provided 1,200 preloaded BlackBerry devices to his insiders. They were preloaded with a information that they could use. It gave them a Rolodex. It worked off of the hammer, so the phones could not be hacked, and they had access to the hammer vault, where military and military industrial secrets were kept, where intelligence secrets from our military and those who provide our weapon systems, but also from our corporations. These were secrets that were stolen by the Obama administration, Brennan and Clapper, put into the hammer vault, and then his trusted insiders like Joe Biden and Hunter Biden were given access to that vault of our corporate secrets and everything else. Now, do you think that they just gave him $1.5 billion for nothing? Or did they give him, I don't know, did they give him some money because they handed over the Club K plans, which was developed by this country for 13 years. And then Ash Carter canceled it was at that point called NLOS. Ash Carter canceled after 13 years of R&D. It was 95% complete. 1.6 billion had gone to it. And so it was just about finished and ready to release. And Ash Carter, under Barack Obama, stopped it, and 30 days later, Russia showed up with it.
Right. Right. Talk. Well, we're doing a pretty broad-ranging discussion here, but let's talk about Club K. Let's talk about Port Canaveral. You guys have done some amazing research and discovered all the collusion that happened under Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Talk a little bit about Club K. Talk a little bit about Port Canaveral.
Well, at the same time, Port Canaveral, the Project Pelican deals first began. So they announced the deal and they signed the deal in one day. There was no CFIUS review, no national security threat analysis. They handed the cargo container operations to Gulftainer. No one okayed the deal. They made the claim that it was just a lease, so it didn't require a CFIUS review. That is not correct. The law clearly states that a CFIUS review, whether it's a lease or a sale, and then, so at the same point in time that they're being handed access to our ports, right there next to NASA, right there where our satellites are launched, really Air, Sea, and Space Command, very important national security port for us, critical infrastructure. So at the same time that that's happening, right before that, Gulftainer goes into a joint venture with Russia, and through Rostec, Rosoboron Export. That company exports the Club K. The Club K is a Trojan horse missile launching system. It appears to be a standard cargo container, intermodal cargo container. That's the cargo containers that we see getting on trains and trucks across this country. So what it does, however, is opens up with caliber missiles inside that launch EMP, nuclear, biological, chemical, and a standard payload. So once it's inside the wire, and should it be opened via satellite, and they have a 10-year shelf life, once inside the wire, if they launch on this country, our radar points north and east. There is nothing we can do to shoot this down. If you think Barack Obama brought this in and Joe Biden without purpose, think again. Joe Biden was the one setting the table for Gulftainer across the nation. They were, via Tiger Grants, preparing the ports for Gulftainer to come in. And people certainly remember what happened with Dubai Ports World. The people stood up and said, no, we don't want this. So,
No,
Joe Biden.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. So Joe Biden was preparing, setting the table, as I said, putting money to improve the ports. And then he said it was going to be open bidding and American jobs, none of which happened. They simply gave Gulftainer U.S. ports, and then he gave them the entire. That's especially important because Gulftainer is owned, it's a Middle Eastern family that's actually out of Iraq. Mm-hmm. Both brothers worked for Saddam Hussein. Dr. Jafar Dia-Jafar, Saddam Hussein's nuclear. Hamid Dia-Jafar was under investigation by the U.S. 3 congressional committees and the Treasury Department. Why? Because Hamid Dia-Jafar was found through the BCCI investigation that he was running an operation, a scheme known as Oil for Superweapons, which was to fund Saddam and his brothers' WMD program. Imagine giving US to this pair of people, not to mention that Dr. Dia-Jafar was on the Pentagon's blacklist as we entered Iraq. And he was found, he was the first create. It was capture or kill for him. Capture or kill.
Mary, I hate to say this, but we're running into some problems with your sound from your phone. So obviously, what you're talking about is very important information. Alan, You were involved with this very open expose. Talk about how Gulftainer ended up going to Wilmington, Delaware, and other locations as well.
So as Mary mentioned, one of our pieces of national security in place to prevent our infrastructure from being taken over by our adversaries is called CFI. It's a Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. So this is an interagency committee in which you have representatives from the State Department, Homeland Security, the Defense Department, Treasury Department, Commerce Department all weigh in when you have a foreign company coming to start operations in the United States, whether they're either purchasing an American-based company or leasing property in the United States to operate out of. So what happened was that the Obama administration actually placed an operative inside the Treasury Department basically as a gatekeeper to allow some nefarious deals to go through that should not have ever gone through. Now, I'm sure your listeners remember the 2006 Dubai Ports World debacle, in which the UAE government wanted to take over a whole bunch of U.S. ports. Fortunately, there was enough pushback that they backed off and the deal never went through. But in the case of Gulftainer and in the case of Uranium One, the Obama administration had placed a bureaucrat named Amin Nabi Mir in the Treasury Department working as the CFIUS chairperson. So what this office did was they basically screened any deals that were going to be looked at by the CFIUS committee and made a determination whether or not that deal was what's called a covered transaction. A covered transaction would basically require them to alert all 17 intelligence agencies, as well as all these different departments in the cabinet, that we need you to sign off on this deal. You're going to have to do a full CFIUS review, a full national security threat analysis. That would have been overseen by D&I Clapper. But thanks to Amin Nabi Mir, that never happened. So we looked into his background. Turns out that his father was on the founding council of ISNA, Islamic Society of North America. Now, Amin Nabi Mir himself was twice the president of the youth wing of ISNA. ISNA has connections to Hamas. That was discovered through the Holy Land investigation by the Justice Department. They were found to be unindicted co-conspirators. Furthermore, his father, Amin Nabi Mir's father, was partners in a pro-Kashmir organization. Now, his partner, Amin Nabi Faye, was actually arrested by the FBI, and it turns out that he was receiving wire payments from the ISI, the Pakistani intelligence agency. So thanks to this person, Amin Nabi Mir, the CFIUS review never happened for Gulftainer's deal at Port Canaveral. He was then promoted, and then when Gulftainer came into Wilmington, at that point he had moved up with an even higher level at the Treasury Department, and once again, Gulftainer got in without a CFIUS review.
And that's an amazing story. Go ahead, Mary.
Well, it gets a little worse. I hope my sound is not so bad, too bad, Dan.
Yeah, now you're good. Now you're good. Yep.
Okay. Well, it gets worse because what Amin Nabi Mir also put through was the Uranium One deal. And he said that it did not need a CFIUS review because he said it was just a deal with Canada. But unless people understand the implications of that Uranium One deal, we hear that they gave 22% of our uranium to Russia. The real implication is that they have our uranium signature. So let's say we get hit with our own uranium, a nuclear weapon in this country. It has our own signature on it. And we don't hold the uranium signatures for Russia or Iran. So think about, the Clintons were involved in this. and those who handed over our uranium to our adversaries so that they would hold our uranium signature. You
Wow.
can't even imagine this level of treason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and they've done it. Obviously, it went back to the Clintons when Bill Clinton was president. The Chinese were sending money to his campaign. He got away with it. I mean, if that isn't treason, I don't know what is.
Just like Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so as we did this last piece on Gulftainer, because now they're taking another port on the Delaware River, and they'll have another cargo container operation there. And that's disturbing because, you know, when the coalition forces went into Iraq, they were able to get something known as the Saddam tapes. And on those, you have Dr. Dia Jafar, and Saddam and the rest of his top military cabinet, and they were musing about putting a nuclear weapon into Washington, D.C. So, as General Milley used to say, when people tell you they want to kill you, believe them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we've put, under the Obama administration, they gave 22% of our uranium to an adversary. They now hold our nuclear signature, and then they brought a nuclear mastermind who worked his entire life with Russia and with Yevgeny Primakov, the ambassador to Russia, the Russian ambassador to Iraq. And Dr. Jafar and the Jafars have worked very, very closely with Russia, and the Soviet Union before them. And keep in mind, it just, as we've heard with the perestroika deception, Vladimir Putin himself confirmed all that when he came out not too long ago and said, I was a communist. I liked communism, and I like it still.
Mm-hmm.
He was very clear in his belief system. So the idea that we've taken people who worked with our adversaries, worked for Saddam Hussein, and I'm sure, Dan, I know you understand the Islamic Bloc. The Islamic Bloc was created by Russia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very definitely.
To destroy this country.
Absolutely. And they were trained. Many of the fighters in the Islamic Bloc were trained in Russia by the KGB.
Ayman Zawahiri is a KGB agent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, and the fact that they tried to say that Putin and somehow that Donald Trump was an asset of Putin and the Russians, when in fact it was quite the other way around, wasn't it?
Oh, Dan, that is such a good point to bring up, because not only that, as they began trying to frame Trump as a Russian asset, you know what an incredible man General Pachepa is. This Romanian general who came over here as a defector. He exposed that he was actually working for the KGB when he was a Romanian general, because Ceausescu was working with the Soviets. And he wrote a piece at PJ Media on February 9th, 2018, and he said, I should know, and I would tell you that Barack Obama, like Whittaker Chambers once had been, is Kremlin intel. Think about that coming from General Pachepa.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, what's interesting about that, Dan, that piece that he wrote, it was up at PJ Media for a very long time, until just recently. And they not only removed it from PJ Media, totally scrubbed it, but they scrubbed it from the Wayback Machine as well. But it's the only piece that General Pachepa wrote that they did scrub.
That's amazing. I didn't read that, but I have to tell you, that doesn't surprise me one little bit. Anybody that followed Barack Obama's political career, it was like a Cinderella story. It had to be that he was predetermined or predestined to these roles because he didn't have any real credentials to either become a senator, and then a senator. What, he'd been a senator like a year and a half, 2 years, and he's running for president of the United States. I mean, this is amazing.
It is amazing. But right now, what we're looking at beyond Scorecard, we've had the head of CISA, Chris Krebs. Have you noticed him in the news lately?
Yeah, I have.
So he's come out and he said there's no such thing as Scorecard and Hammer. And then Chad Wolf was ordered to fire him, and Wolf refused to do it, which was really a stunning moment in time. But what you have to understand, we just wrote a piece on Chris Krebs, and we wrote about his entire career. In his entire career, he is in short distance and working with James Clapper, who commandeered the Hammer. Let me have Alan. He's texted me. He would love to present this to you. This is a very important piece. This is a very important piece because Chris Krebs is coming out and saying there is no such thing as Hammer and Scorecard. He knows darn well that there is. Go ahead, Alan.
So President Trump, as we know, it's not going to be the first time he's had someone in his administration trying to undermine him. So we're at a critical point right now where the election results are being disputed. And the left-wing media and all the fact checkers, when the topic of the Hammer and Scorecard come up, they're immediately citing this person named Chris Krebs. Now he's at the Department of Homeland Security. He's the director of their cyber agency, CISA. And it's actually called the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency. Now, this article is posted at theamericanreport.org. So what we did was we did a deep dive into the background of Chris Krebs, who's the director of CISA, as well as his deputy director, whose name is Matt Travis. It's very interesting here that Chris Krebs had worked at a company called Obsidian Analysis. This is a intelligence consulting firm in Washington. They launched it in 2010, and it's since gone on to make millions and millions of dollars. What's interesting is that the founder of Obsidian Analysis was a gentleman named Kevin O'Prey. Now, he co-founded that along with Matt Travis, who is now the deputy director of CISA. Now, Kevin O'Prey was at another contractor called DFI International. This is a very big Washington, D.C. contractor in defense and homeland security and intelligence. A lot of former CIA people there. But what's interesting is that DFI International Government Services, which was headed by Kevin O'Prey, who co-founded Obsidian Analysis, they hired James Clapper to be their chief operating officer. Then when Clapper left in 2007, he was appointed to be the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. In that office, he had oversight of the Hammer and Scorecard. Because if you recall earlier, I said that Dennis Montgomery was not only a CIA contractor, he contracted with the Defense Department and the Air Force. This was an intelligence program for collecting foreign intelligence. So what does that mean? That means that O'Prey received a contract with Clapper's office. Now, when Clapper left DFI International Government Services being run by O'Prey, he received a $50,000 exit bonus. Then he quickly got a contract working with Clapper's office at the Pentagon that oversaw the Hammer. This actually got attention when the Los Angeles Times said, you know, there's a lot of revolving doors between these contracting agencies and the government.
And they were completely right about that, weren't they? That's amazing. See, that's the kind of stuff that most Americans have no idea. That's why it's so important that you and Mary continue to do the amazing research that you do and have the freedom to do that.
Well,
Now, another thing
so
that's disturbing.
Go ahead.
Another thing that's disturbing about this DFI government services is DFI is very involved with Democrat administrations, heavily filled with people that were from the Clinton administration. And in fact, it was founded by people who are connected to a lot of these left-wing think tanks.
Okay, well, Mary,
Well,
you had a comment on that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when you see that they're all connected through these intelligence contractors, and you see that that Clapper has oversight over the hammer, as it is a foreign surveillance tool, to keep America safe after 9/11, and you see the connections that he has to Chris Krebs, and then you see that from that time that he has oversight over it at the Department of Defense, and then he and John Brennan illegally commandeer the hammer, and they turn it against America, and as Dennis Montgomery says, for the purpose of blackmail and leverage. And it's worth repeating that they were using the hammer to spy on not only Donald Trump, not only General Flynn, who this is like a Soviet-style prosecution of General Flynn. We have never seen anything like this before. Yeah. Beyond that, they had Supreme Court justices, particularly John Roberts, under illegal surveillance. They had 109 members of Congress, business leaders. They were going into law firms, particularly those that did intellectual property work. They were going into, they were going into churches and synagogues and getting the names and information about anyone who belonged to a church and a synagogue. That is so chilling. You can't, this is something worthy of Stalin or Hitler or Mao, but let me extrapolate from who they were spying on and the information they were gleaning, going into abortion clinics and psychiatric facilities. This is something that we have never seen in this country, but then go from that point of information to the fact that the senior advisor to Joe Biden is Anita Dunn, who told that her favorite philosopher is Mao, who killed 100 million of his own people.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that's why I said earlier on, you couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, it is so expansive and so total and so incredibly corrupt that you couldn't make something like this up. There's not a handful of people in the world that could even dream up something like this.
You know why? Because the American people are uncommonly decent. They are uncommonly decent, and they could never imagine a thing like this. Our intelligence agencies, or some who are in them, are not. You also know about former FBI Director James Comey. Can you imagine an official saying, "I used to be a communist. I don't know what I am now"?
Yeah.
Well, he said that. So what is he now? An oligarch?
Well, I can tell you one thing. They demonized McCarthy and created something called McCarthyism because Joe McCarthy was exposing the fact that so much of our government and so much of, at that time, Hollywood were really card-carrying communists. He should be one of our most revered people from our past, one of our most revered leaders, for the fact that he tried to expose it, and they destroyed him for it.
Absolutely. And the idea that people talk about McCarthyism, the man was a hero. Not only was he a hero, Dan, but the fact that he went into the hospital with a minor I think he had a flu. I mean, it was very minor why he was placed in the hospital, and then he died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and they have called him a drunk and just about everything negative they could come up with, they did, and trying
Very
to
brave man.
demonize him. And the fact is, he was a very brave man. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've got a real problem here. Talk a little bit about what you see happening with this election now with Donald Trump, what they're going to try to do, and what Donald Trump is going to do to turn this ship around. What can we do to help him?
Well, the American people need to stand up. I mean, they came out in a massive landslide to vote for this president because, understand, you're voting for whether your country is a free country or where you're going to turn into China or whether China takes us over. Because one of the things we discovered, by the way, was that Gulftainer wasn't just in business with Russia and Iran. They're also in business with China. All right?
Mm-hmm.
That's very important. So that's what Joe Biden gave us. So right now we're looking at whether we're going to be, taken over by our adversaries through the likes of Joe Biden and Barack Obama before him, or we're going to stand shoulder to shoulder with this president and demand that we will preserve our freedom in this country. And you know what, Dan, any of us that have, family that have fought in, wars throughout this country's history, in World War I or II and Vietnam, the Gulf War veterans, we have a responsibility to preserve this nation and freedom for those that come behind us. Will we be such abject failures that we can't stand up for this country? We cannot. Mm. And truly, if the lights go out here, they will go out everywhere. And I've said before, and people need to remember this, no one is coming to save us. Mm-hmm. We are the people we have been waiting for. We are the ones who have to stand up. We are the ones who have to support this president. And we're not going to sit here and listen to this blathering from these talking heads who are willing to throw this country onto the bus because they get a fine paycheck. What have they ever produced in their lives beyond that?
Mm-hmm. No, that's right. And Mary, we had our Red Pill Expo here about a little over a month ago at Jekyll Island, mm-hmm. Georgia. And mm-hmm. I was astounded because with the COVID lockdown crap and all the social distancing, we had sold 650 tickets to that event that were live. And then we had a bunch of live stream on top of that. But I was amazed because about 30% of the audience were what I would call really young people and young families. And mm-hmm. we had some amazing feedback. I think the young people in this country are finally starting to realize that all this crap they've been taught for all these years is nothing but crap, and they're worried
Absolutely.
about their future.
They won't have a future unless they stand up and take this country back. If you think that drooling mess of a communist, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, she couldn't even get 1% as a candidate for the presidency. Mm-hmm. She couldn't even get that minuscule amount of support. If these fools think that we're going to stand down and watch them steal our country, they have another thing coming.
God, I love it, Mary. You speak so well for our country. Thank God there are people and patriots like you and Alan, because that is exactly the message that this country needs to hear. We're not going to put up with this crap. We are not going to allow this happen, not on our watch. I love it.
Well, if you even look at the people that Biden's talking about putting in his pretend cabinet that, he's drooling about, people should be so disturbed as he even talks about putting in the likes of Susan Rice, the woman who lied 6 times on air about Benghazi. Benghazi, they were. You understand what Benghazi was? They were handing weapons through Bar Islam and 2 ports in Syria to ISIS and Al Qaeda.
Mm-hmm.
Hillary was arming the enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they tried to hide it all, and well, they did hide it all. Truthfully, in spite of the best efforts by people like Admiral Lyons and General Paul Vallely and others who were trying to expose what happened in Benghazi.
Yeah, we had 3 men who were in the skiff on the night of Benghazi, and they came forward and they told who was leading that raid and how they were told to destroy documents. They also were handing over our embassy in Cairo. They told our Marines to stand down and to lock up their weapons and to hand the embassy in Cairo, Egypt, to the Muslim Brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they also knew who actually was the one who was leading the raid and killing our people. A U.S. ambassador and we do nothing. We do nothing. We just listen to Susan Rice lie on every television station, and you let the talking heads act like this is all okay. Well, they all knew that it was Soleimani that led that raid. It was Soleimani that killed our people. It was Soleimani from Iran that was collecting a paycheck from this country. The idea that Obama was sending over, wake up, people. This is not normal that we have presidents sending plane loads of cash and gold and everything else to the enemy. This is not the norm. Mm-hmm. And so you have Barack Obama paying our enemy, Iran, that sits there and says, kill the big Satan and then the little Satan, Israel. This is not the norm. And you know what? It should be a national holiday, the day that they killed Soleimani.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And this president had the guts to do this, rather than the other president that was giving him a payday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Well, Mary Allen, this has been a terrific expose, a terrific program. All I can say is that people, you need to wake up and listen to these folks and what they're saying. And that is, don't give up. Don't believe the nonsense out of the mainstream media. Don't believe that it's all over and it's fait accompli, that Joe Biden is going to be our next president. Don't allow this deception and this lie to continue. Mary Allen, I want to give you a minute just to tell our listeners what you think is coming forward and what's going to happen with this election.
Exposure of the theft. There will be exposure of the theft. And so, America, you'd better stand up, because if you don't stand up with this president as he does what he does to expose what happened, then they'll simply take the country anyway. And if we lose it, it won't be coming back for hundreds of years, if ever.
Alan?
Absolutely agree with her. We've got limited time here. We've got until December 14th. Now, President Trump, fortunately, is taking steps, and reportedly, Attorney General Barr has allowed his various U.S. attorneys around the country to initiate investigations into election irregularities, that they don't have to go through Main Justice. They can go ahead and launch those investigations, but I definitely encourage your listeners to go to the AmericanReport.org, read about our coverage of the Hammer and Scorecard, call their representatives, call the White House. We need to push back, because the clock is ticking down for this country and for Western civilization.
All right. Well, thank you both for absolutely informative and brilliantly given presentation. You guys are terrific. You're national heroes, and thank you for being on with us. And let's pray for our president, and let's make sure this does not happen, where they take away this president's landslide victory. Thank you again, both of you.
Thank you, Dan. It's nice to be with you always.
All righty. Well,
thank you.
I tell you what, I am absolutely amazed what wonderful patriots you guys are. I just hope that Americans will stand up and do the right thing. Mary, you're right. We are a kind and decent society. We need to wake up to the people that we're dealing with who are not kind and they are not decent. They are communists and they are ideologues, and they will destroy this country and most of the people in it if given the opportunity. So again, thank you, folks, and I look forward to the next time we get together.
Thank you, Dan.
All righty. Thank
I'd
you.
also like to say thank you to Mary and Alan. You guys are always great when you guys come on. Thank you so much. And I want to remind our viewers out there that we have, they write for the American Report, and I've had it up on screen